Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Adventure and Mystery Book Club as we do another reading of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. So, before we begin, I just wanted to um, mention that I hope that you saw my Facebook post of yesterday, which is basically saying that as we come to the end of uh, 20,000 Leagues, it is time now to start thinking about some of the other titles that we could read going forward. So, what do you want to be the next book that we read in the adventure or mystery genre? And excuse me. And as a prompt, I gave you a list of 13 different titles that are potential uh, titles that we could read. They're all in public domain. They're all stuff that you could find easily on Project Gutenberg for free. And some of them are mysteries and some of them are adventure stories, and so obviously there are a lot more than that, and so you can choose something that was on that list, or if you wanted to, you could come up with your own suggestions. We're certainly looking, forward to new suggestions. If you are interested, please vote in the comments. I did notice that as I checked just before coming on here, that 19 people have apparently seen the post, but I've only gotten one comment. So I don't normally give you any homework, but I'm going to do it today. I need you to go to the Adventure and Mystery Book Club Facebook page and check out the titles that I've listed there, or come up with your own public domain titles. And if you would put a request in or a vote in the comments, then that would be great. We'll see what we get as of Monday at 4 p.m. when we come back for our next reading, and we'll kind of see what people are interested in. So please vote. This is your group, so I want you uh, to express your opinion, and if you have a favorite title, or if there's maybe something that you have always kind of been interested in but never really had a chance to read yourself, then um, then now is the time. You can let your comments be read, I guess. So we are reading the next two chapters of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. We are reading chapters 41 and 42. And just to give you a brief recap on what has happened up to this point, um, the last few chapters we have been reading about how Captain Nemo has sailed the Nautilus under the ice near the South Pole in an attempt to be the first human being to reach that continent, and so he wanted to be the first, and of course this is partly his story, so that's exactly what happened. He did make it to the continent. He was able to go under and between the large ice floes, including the Great Ice Barrier, and make it to the continent, where he was able to plant his flag, the black flag with a gold N on it for Nemo, as and claim the South Pole for himself. And then on their way back, they ended up getting trapped. Apparently, a large ice floe had become very top heavy and toppled over, and basically trapped them within an enclosed section of ice, which required the crew and, of course, our three heroes, Professor Aronnax, Conseil, and Ned Land, to don the Captain Nemo's specially made wetsuits, along with pickaxes, and try chipping away at the ice in a way, in hopes of escaping. And the air was running out, of course. They only had so much air that they could use, and they had not had a chance to reach the surface to replenish their air because, of course, everything is covered in ice on the top. And so it got a little hairy there for a little bit. So they would come in to the Nautilus, and they would have to breathe this very stale, very used up air, a lot of carbon dioxide, and and a lot of times they were, fainting, and they were, almost unconscious from this very thin air, and would only be able to get fresh air from the tanks in the suits when they would go out into the icy water and work with the pickaxes to break up a section of ice. And of course, in the end, they did. Um, and that's where we stand right now. So that was the end of chapter 40. We are now on chapter 41, entitled From Cape Horn to the Amazon. How I got up onto the platform, I cannot say. Perhaps Ned Land had carried me there, but I was breathing and taking in the revivifying sea air. My two companions, were next to me getting drunk on oxygen. People who have gone without food for a long time are unfortunate in that they cannot gulp down thoughtlessly the first thing that given to them. But we did not have to restrain ourselves. We could breathe as much as we wanted, and it was the sea breeze, nothing more than the sea breeze, which brought on our sensual intoxication. "Ah," said Conseil, "how good oxygen is! Monsieur need have no fear of breathing it. There's enough for everybody." As for Ned Land, he did not say a word, but merely opened his jaws wide enough to frighten a shark. And what breaths he took! He drew in air like a furnace going full blast. Our strength soon came back, and when I looked around, I saw we were alone on the platform. None of the crew was in sight, not even Captain Nemo. These strange sailors of the Nautilus seemed satisfied with the air entering the submarine. None of them had come up to taste the pleasure of the sea breeze. The first words I uttered were of thanks and gratitude to my two companions. Ned and Conseil had prolonged my life during the final hours of our long ordeal, but no gratitude could sufficiently repay such devotion. "Ah, Professor," replied Ned Land, "don't even mention it. What did we do? Nothing. It's a matter of simple arithmetic. Your life was worth more than ours, and so it had to be preserved." "No, Ned," I answered. "It isn't worth more. No one is superior to a man as kind and generous as you." "Goodness, Professor," said the Canadian in an embarrassed tone of voice. "And you, my good Conseil, you must have suffered a lot too." "Not too much, to tell the truth. I was lacking a few mouthfuls of air, but I felt I could scrape through. What's more, when I saw Monsieur fainting, it took away my desire to inhale, and it, so to speak, took my breath." Conseil felt embarrassed at the cliché he was about to utter, and did not finish his sentence. "My friends," I replied, deeply touched, "we are bound to one another forever, and with me you have the right—" "Which I'm going to take advantage of," retorted the Canadian. "What?" exclaimed Conseil. "Yes," continued Ned Land, "the right to take you with me when I leave this infernal Nautilus." "By the way," said Conseil, "are we heading in the proper direction?" "Yes," I replied, "since we're heading toward the sun, and here the sun means north." "That's all very well," said Ned Land, "but we still have to find out whether we're heading for the Pacific or the Atlantic, or, in other words, toward inhabited or deserted regions." There was no answer to this, and I was afraid Captain Nemo would take us to that vast ocean fringed by the coasts of Asia and America. He would thus be completing his underwater tour of the world and returning to those waters in which the Nautilus had its greatest freedom. But if we went back to the Pacific, far from any inhabited shores, what would happen to Ned Land's project? We would soon find out. The Nautilus was traveling fast. Before long, we had passed the Antarctic Circle and were heading for Cape Horn. We reached the tip of the American continent at 7 p.m. on March 31st. Then all of our past sufferings were forgotten. The memory of our imprisonment in the ice faded from our minds. We thought only of the future. We no longer saw Captain Nemo either in the lounge or on the platform. But each day the first mate marked our position on the chart, and this permitted me to know the Nautilus's exact direction. And that night, to my great satisfaction, it became evident that we were heading north by way of the Atlantic. I told the news to Ned and Conseil. "Good," replied the Canadian. "But where exactly is the Nautilus going?" "I couldn't say, Ned." "Do you suppose the captain would now want to go to the North Pole and return to the Pacific through the famous Northwest Passage?" "I wouldn't present it to him in the form of a challenge," replied Conseil. "Well, that's all right," said the Canadian. "We could just skip out on him beforehand." "In any case," added Conseil, "this Captain Nemo is an extraordinary man, and we won't regret having known him." "Especially after we've left him," retorted Ned Land. The next day, April 1st, when the Nautilus surfaced several minutes before noon, we sighted land off to the west. It was Tierra del Fuego, which was given its name by early navigators because of the many columns of smoke they saw rising from native huts. This Tierra del Fuego is a vast agglomeration of islands stretching out 65 miles in length and 173 miles in width, lying between 53 degrees and 56 degrees south latitude and 67 degrees 50 minutes and 77 degrees 15 minutes west longitude. The coastline seemed rather low, but in the distance rose high mountains. I even thought I could make out Mount Sarmiento, which rises 6,790 feet above sea level. It is a pyramid-shaped block of shale with a very pointed peak which, depending on whether or not it is surrounded by clouds, announces good or bad weather, as Ned Land told me. "So it's a well-known barometer, then, my friend?" "Yes, monsieur, a natural weather gauge, which has never deceived me in all the times I've sailed through the Straits of Magellan." Just then we could see the peak clearly outlined against the sky. This was an omen of good weather, which turned out to be correct. The Nautilus dove underwater and cruised along no more than a few miles off the coast. Through the open glass panels in the lounge, I saw a kind of sea vine, and also some gigantic sea wrack, specimens of which I had seen in the open water around the South Pole. It had shiny, sticky filaments that measured as much as 1,000 feet in length. They were like cables, bigger around than a man's thumb, and very strong. So strong, in fact, that they were often used to moor ships. Another plant, known as velp, with leaves 4 feet long, was growing among the coral and carpeting the ocean floor. It served as both a nest and food for myriads of shellfish. Seals and otters came there to gorge themselves, eating a mixture of fish and ocean vegetables, rather as the English do. The Nautilus passed at a high speed over this rich, luxuriant bottom. Toward evening we approached the Falkland Islands, whose high summits I saw the next day. The sea was not very deep. I therefore assumed, not without reason, that these two islands, surrounded by a great number of smaller islands, had once formed part of Patagonia. The Falkland Islands were probably discovered by the famous John Davis, and first called the South Davis Islands. Later, Richard Hawkins named them the Maiden Islands. Then, at the beginning of the 18th century, they were called the Malouines by Breton fisherman, and finally the Falkland Islands by the English, to whom they belong today. In these waters our nets brought in lovely specimens of seaweed, and especially a certain kind of sea wrack whose roots were loaded with the best mussels in the world. Geese and ducks came on deck by the dozens, and they soon took their place on the ship's menu. As for fish, I particularly noted a bony species related to the goby. I was able to admire many kinds of jellyfish, and particularly the most beautiful of all, the one called cryosaur, which is found only near the Falkland Islands. Sometimes their swimming bell would be shaped like a very smooth half globe with reddish-brown stripes and ending in 12 symmetrical tentacles. Sometimes they looked like an upside-down basket from which were falling large, graceful leaves and long red twigs. They swam by moving their four-leafed shaped arms and letting their thick mass of tentacles float in the water. I would have liked to preserve several specimens of these delicate zoophytes, but they were like clouds, shadows, or phantoms that melt and evaporate once they are out of their natural element. When the last heights of the Falkland Islands had disappeared beneath the horizon, the Nautilus dove to a depth between 65 and 80 feet and followed the coast of South America. Captain Nemo still did not appear. Until April 3rd, we did not leave the waters of Patagonia, sometimes cruising underwater, sometimes on the surface. Then the Nautilus passed by the large estuary of Rio Plata, and on April 4th we were off Uruguay, but 50 miles out to sea. We still headed north, following the winding coast of South America. By then we had covered 16,000 leagues since coming on board in the Japan Sea. Toward 11 in the morning we crossed the Tropic of Capricorn at the 37th meridian and passed off Cape Frio. To Ned Land's great displeasure, Captain Nemo did not seem to like being so near the inhabited coast of Brazil, for we traveled at a dizzying speed. No fish or bird, however fast it could travel, was able to follow us, and thus whatever curiosities of nature these waters contained escaped all observation. This speed was maintained for several days, and on the afternoon of April 9th, we sighted the most easterly point of South America, Cape San Roque. But then the Nautilus once again headed out to sea, searching for the underwater valley which lies between this cape and Sierra Leone on the coast of Africa. This valley splits in two at the latitude of the West Indies and ends to the north in an enormous depression 30,000 feet deep. Between there and the Lesser Antilles, there rises a vertical cliff 4 miles high and on level with the Cape Verde Islands. Another wall, no less imposing, and between those two barriers lies the submerged continent of Atlantis. The bottom of this immense valley is dotted with several underwater mountains, which give it a very picturesque aspect. All this information is based largely on manuscript charts contained in the library of the Nautilus, charts evidently drawn by Captain Nemo according to his own personal observances. For 2 days we visited these deep, deserted waters. The Nautilus would dive by means of its side fins, traveling in a long diagonal course that would take it to any depth. But on April 11th, it suddenly surfaced, and we saw the coastline around the mouth of the Amazon, whose estuary is so vast that it can still find fresh water several leagues out to sea. We had crossed the equator. 20 miles to the west lay Guyana, a French territory in which we would have found easy refuge. But the wind was blowing strongly, and a dinghy would not have ventured on the surface of such a raging sea. Ned Land undoubtedly realized this, for he said nothing. As for me, I made no allusion to his plans for escape, for I did not want to push him into some rash venture doomed to failure. I took advantage of this delay by making interesting studies. During the 2 days of April 11th and 12th, the Nautilus remained on the surface, and its dragnet brought in a marvelous variety of zoophytes, fish, and reptiles. The chains holding the dragnet had caught several kinds of zoophytes. For the most part, they were lovely Fictilineae, belonging to the family of Antinidians, and among other species there was the Fictalis protexta, peculiar to this part of the ocean, whose cylindrical body was adorned with vertical lines and red dots, and which was covered with a marvelous tuft of tentacles. As for shellfish, they consisted of species I had already observed, such as the tourtellae, porphyry shells, with evenly crossed lines and reddish-brown spots standing out vividly against the flesh-colored background. Strange pterocerae, looking like petrified scorpions, translucent cavolineae, argonauts, cuttlefish, which are so good to eat, and certain species of squid, which ancient naturalists used to classify among the flying fish, and which is used primarily as bait for catching cod. Among the fish of these waters I had not yet had the opportunity to study, noted various species. Among cartilaginous fish, there was a certain kind of lamprey about 15 inches long, with a greenish head, violet fins, bluish-gray back, and a silvery brown belly, with bright spots and a band of gold encircling the iris of its eye. These strange animals must have been brought out to sea by the currents of the Amazon, for they are freshwater creatures. There was also a species of ray, with a pointed muzzle, thin tail, and long notched sword in front. Small sharks, 3 feet long, gray and whitish in color, whose several rows of teeth bent backward. Anglers shaped like isosceles triangles and about a foot and a half long, about a foot and a half long, reddish in color, with long, wide pectoral fins that made them look like bats, but whose horn-like appendages near their nostrils had earned them the name of sea unicorns. Finally, several kinds of triggerfish, the Curasavian, whose dotted sides shone with a gold tint, the Caprisca, light violet in color, with iridescent luster like a pigeon's throat. I will finish this somewhat dry but very accurate list with a mention of the bony fish I observed. There were some odontagnalthi, whose bright silver hue and thin pointed body made them look like foot-long sardines, and a kind of mackerel with 2 anal fins, black centronate, with which fishermen catch by using torches. They are large fish, 6 feet long, with fatty, white, firm flesh, which tastes like eel when served fresh, and like smoked salmon when dried. Wrasse, with scales only around the base of their dorsal and anal fins. Chrysopterae, whose gold and silver bodies glitter as if encrusted with rubies and topazes. Gilt heads, which are very tasty and whose phosphorescence make them so easy to see in the water. Sienna, with golden tails. Acanthopterans, anableps from Suriname, etc. But this etc. will not prevent me from citing yet one more fish, which Conseil will remember for a long time to come, and not without reason. One of our nets had brought in a kind of very flat ray weighing about 45 pounds, which, without its tail, would have formed a perfectly round disc. Its smooth skin, ending in a double-lobed fin, was white on top and reddish underneath, with big dark blue spots encircled in black. Once on the platform, it writhed around, trying to turn back over on its stomach, and in its struggle it got so near the edge that one last flip and it would have fallen back into the sea. But Conseil, who hated to lose a fish like this, jumped on it and grabbed it with both hands before I could stop him. He was instantly thrown back. He lay on the platform with his legs in the air and his body half paralyzed, shouting, "Help, monsieur, help!" Ned Land and I picked him up, massaged him, and when he finally came back to his senses, this eternal classifier murmured in halting tones, "Class of cartilaginous fish, order of Chondropterygians, with fixed gills, suborder of Salacians, family of rays, genus of electric ray." Yes, my friend, an electric ray that almost knocked you out. Yes, monsieur, believe me, retorted Conseil, but I'll get my revenge on this animal. How? By eating it. And so he did, that very night, but purely out of a feeling of retaliation, for it was apparently quite leathery. Poor Conseil had attacked an electric ray of the most dangerous kind, the cumana. This strange animal living in a medium like water which conducts electricity can kill fish several yards away. So great is the power of his electrical organ that two principal surfaces measure no less than 27 square feet. On the next day, April 12th, the Nautilus approached the mouth of the Maroni River and the coast of Dutch Guiana. There we saw sea cows living in family groups. These manatees, like the dugong and Steller's sea cow, belong to the order Sirenia. They are peaceful and inoffensive animals which grow as long as 20 or 25 feet and weigh up to 9,000 pounds. I told Ned Land and Conseil that far-sighted nature had assigned these animals an important role. It is they and seals who have been destined to graze on underwater prairies and thus destroy the agglomerations of plants which obstruct the mouths of tropical rivers. And do you know, I added, what has happened since man has almost completely destroyed these useful creatures? Rotting plants have fouled the air, and it is this foul air which has produced the yellow fever, laying waste to these remarkable lands. Poisonous vegetation has increased beneath these warm seas, and this disease has spread unchecked from the mouth of the Rio Plata to Florida. And if one is to believe Toussaint, this scourge is nothing to that which will strike our descendants when the seas become empty of whales and seals. Then, filled with octopus, jellyfish, and squid, they will become vast centers of infection, since their waters will no longer possess those vast stomachs which God has delegated to scour the surface of the seas. Nevertheless, the crew of the Nautilus caught half a dozen of these sea cows. It was a question of laying in a stock of excellent meat, superior to beef or veal. But the hunting was not interesting. The sea cows let themselves be caught without putting up any defense. Several thousand pounds of meat were stored on board to be dried and preserved. That day the Nautilus's stock was further increased through a very strange manner of fishing. The dragnet had brought up a certain amount of fish whose heads end in an oval plaque with fleshy edges. They were Echines, there we go, of the third family of Sabrachian Malacopter, Malacopter, Malacopterigians. This flat disc on their head is composed of a mobile, transversal cartilaginous layers between which the animal can create a vacuum, thus permitting him to fasten onto things like a leech. The remora, which I have observed in the Mediterranean, belongs to this species, but the one we saw here, the Echinus ostercara, found only in these waters. Our sailors took them out of the nets and deposited them in tubs full of water. Once this was done, the Nautilus went in nearer the coast. There, a certain number of sea turtles were sleeping on the surface. It would have been difficult to catch these precious reptiles, for the least sound awakens them, and their solid shell protects them from harpoons. But the Echinus was to help capture them with extraordinary ease and assurance. This animal, in fact, is a living fish hook, and could be of great use to the ordinary fisherman. To the tail of these fish the sailors attached a ring large enough not to cramp their movements, and to this ring a long line, which was tied on board at its other end. The Echinus were then thrown into the sea, and immediately they started to work, attaching themselves to the turtle's shells. They held on with such determination that they would have been torn apart rather than let go. They were then hauled on board along with the turtles to whom they were attached. In this way we caught several cacuans, about 3 feet long and weighing about 450 pounds apiece. Their shells were covered with a very valuable horny plaques, which were a transparent brown color with white and yellow spots. Moreover, their flesh was excellent to eat. This fishing ended our sojourn in the waters off the Amazon basin, and as night came on, the Nautilus once more headed for the open sea. Chapter 42. Squid. For several days the Nautilus remained far from any shore. It obviously did not want to enter the Gulf of Mexico or the Caribbean, even though it would not have found itself in uncomfortably shallow water, since the average depth of these seas is 6,000 feet. But probably a region so full of islands and so constantly crossed by steamers was not to Captain Nemo's liking. On April 16th we sighted Martinique and Guadeloupe from about 30 miles offshore. For a moment I could make out their highest peaks. The Canadian, who had counted on being able to escape in the Caribbean either by reaching land or by hailing one of the many ships that ply between the various islands, was very disappointed. It would have been quite easy to get away there if Ned Land had been able to get the dinghy without the captain's knowledge. But on the open ocean there was no longer any question of trying. Ned, Conseil, and I had a long conversation on the subject. We had now been prisoners aboard the Nautilus for 6 months. We had covered 17,000 leagues, and, as Ned Land put it, there was no reason to think it would ever end. He therefore made an unexpected proposal. It was to ask the captain, in no uncertain terms, whether or not he intended to keep us on board indefinitely. This did not strike me as a good idea, but rather one doomed to failure. I felt that we should expect nothing from the commander of the Nautilus, and rely only on ourselves. Moreover, for some time now this man had become somber, more withdrawn, and less sociable. He seemed to avoid me. I only saw him once in a great while. He had formerly enjoyed explaining to me the wonders of undersea life, but now he left me alone in my studies and no longer came to the lounge. What sort of a change had come over him? What had brought it on? I had done nothing for which he could blame me. Had our presence on board perhaps begun to disturb him? Yet I had no reason to hope he would set us free. I therefore asked Ned Land to let me think it over before doing anything. If this plan did not succeed, it could revive his suspicions, make our situation difficult, and harm the Canadians' projects. I must add that I could not give our physical condition as a reason, for, except for the trying experience under the great ice barrier, we had never been in better health. Neither Ned, Conseil, nor I. The healthy food, invigorating air, regular hours, and uniform temperature kept illness at bay. Moreover, for a man like Captain Nemo, who did not miss life on land, for whom this was his home, and who was free to go where he wanted, I could understand such an existence. But we had not broken with humanity, and as for me, I had done much interesting new research, and I did not want to have it buried with me. I now would be able to write a definitive book on the sea, and I wanted this work to see the light of day sooner or later. And even here in the West Indian waters, at a depth of 35 feet with the panels open, how many interesting things I was able to observe and set down in my daily notes. Among other zoophytes, there were Portuguese men of war, known as pelagic Phasalia, fat and oblong in shape and with a mother of pearl tint, holding up their membrane to the wind and letting their blue thread-like tentacles float on the surface. To the eye, they seemed like lovely jellyfish, but to the touch, they were like poisonous nettles. Among the articulata, I saw some sea worms about 5 feet long, armed with a pink horn and equipped with 1,700 organs of locomotion, winding and twisting through the water and gleaming with all the colors of the rainbow. Among various fish, I saw enormous devilfish, a kind of ray 6 feet long and weighing 600 pounds, with triangular pectoral fins and a slight hump in the middle of its back and eyes placed on the extreme front sides of its head. They were floating in the water like wrecked ships, and sometimes they covered our window like a thick shutter. There were also triggerfish, which nature has colored only black and white, a kind of goby with a long, plump body, yellow fins, and protruding lower jaw. Some mackerel 5 feet long, with short, sharp teeth, their bodies covered with small scales. In addition, we saw clouds of red mullets with shining fins and golden stripes running from their head to their tail. These masterpieces of jewelry were once upon a time considered to be sacred to Diana, and they were particularly sought after by rich Romans. There was a proverb about them which said, "He who catches them can never eat them." Lastly, we saw golden pomacanthe, dressed in velvet and silk and decorated with emerald green bands, passing before our eyes like lords and ladies from a Veronese painting, spurred gilt heads which dashed off with one stroke of their powerful underfin, clupanodons 15 inches long, wrapped in a phosphorus gleam, common mullets churning the water with their big plump tails, red corrigoni, which seemed to be mowing the ocean with their sharp pectoral fin, and silver moonfish, worthy of their name, rising on the horizon of the sea like so many pale moons. How many other marvelous new specimens of fish I could have observed if the Nautilus had not little by little dived down to deep water. Its side fins brought it to depths ranging from 6,500 to 11,000 feet. There the animal kingdom was represented only by sea lilies, starfish, charming pentacrini, with a straight stalk bearing a little chalice, top shells, and a type of coastal mollusk called keyhole limpets. On April 20th, we came back up to a depth of 5,000 feet. The nearest land was the Bahamas, spread out like so many paving stones on the surface of the water. There we saw high underwater cliffs, formed by worn blocks of stone arranged like bricks, between which there were dark holes whose depths the rays from our searchlight could not reach. These rocks were carpeted with huge plants, giant sea tangles, and sea wracks, forming a bower of hydrophytes worthy of the world of Titans. As we talked about these colossal plants, Conseil, Ned, and I were naturally led into discussion about the gigantic animals of the ocean, for one was obviously intended as nourishment for the other. Nevertheless, as I looked through the window of the now almost immobile Nautilus, I could make out nothing among these long filaments but the principal articulata of the division of Branchiopodae, sea spiders, with their long legs, purplish blue crabs, and Cleos peculiar to the West Indian waters. It was about 11 o'clock when Ned Land drew my attention to a formidable wriggling movement among the long seaweed. Those, those are a kind of, those are the kind of caves squid live in, I said, and I wouldn't be surprised to see several of those monsters. What? Exclaimed Conseil. Squid? Mere squid from the class cephalopods? No, I said, a giant squid. But Ned must have made some mistake, for I don't see anything. That's too bad, said Conseil. I'd like to come face to face with one of these giant squid I've heard so much about, and which can drag ships down to the bottom. They're called kraken, I think. You'll never get me to believe that such animals exist, said Ned Land. Why not? Replied Conseil. We believed in Monsieur's narwhal. And we were wrong, Conseil. Yes, but others still believe in it. Maybe they do, Conseil, but as for me, I've decided not to admit these monsters really exist until I've dissected one with my own hands. Doesn't Monsieur believe in giant squid either? Conseil asked me. Who in the name of heaven ever has believed in him? Cried the Canadian. Lots of people, Ned, my friend. Maybe scientists, but not fishermen. No, Ned, both fishermen and scientists. I myself can remember, said Conseil, with the most serious tone of voice in the world, having seen a large boat dragged down by the arms of a squid. You've seen that? Yes, Ned. With your own eyes? With my own eyes. Where, if you don't mind telling me? At Saint-Malo, replied Conseil imperturbably. In the harbor? Asked Ned Land sarcastically. No, in a church, answered Conseil. In a church? Cried the Canadian. Yes, Ned, it was a painting of a squid. Well, that's a good one, exclaimed Ned Land, and he burst out laughing. Monsieur Conseil's trying to pull a fast one on me. He's right, I said. I've heard about that painting, but the subject it represents is taken from a legend, and you know how trustworthy legends are when it comes to natural history. Moreover, when it's a question of monsters, people's imagination asks nothing better than to be given a free rein. Not only has it been claimed that squid and octopus can drag down ships, but a certain Olas Magnus, talks of a mile-long cephalopod which looks more like an island than an animal. They also tell of the Bishop of Midros, who one day set up his altar on a huge rock to say Mass. Once Mass was over, the rock moved off and went back into the sea. The rock was an octopus. Oh, is that all? Oh, I'm sorry. This is Ned Land, who says, "Oh, is that all?" asked the Canadian. "No," I replied. "Another bishop, Pontoppidan of Bergam, talks of an octopus on which a regiment of cavalry could maneuver." In the old days, bishops must have been good storytellers," said Ned Land. And lastly, naturalists of ancient times mention monsters whose mouths were the size of gulfs, and who were too big to pass through the Straits of Gibraltar. "That's a good one, all right," exclaimed the Canadian. "But how much truth is there in all these stories?" asked Conseil. "None, my friends, or at least none which does not pass the bounds of probability and enter the realm of fable or legend. Nevertheless, there must have been something which stimulated the imagination of these storytellers. It can't be denied that there exist species of octopus and squid which grow to great size, although still smaller than whales. Aristotle saw a squid 5 cubits long, or, in other words, 10 feet 2 inches. The museums of Trieste and Montpellier have skeletons of octopuses 6.5 feet long. Moreover, naturalists have calculated that one of these creatures with a body 6 feet long would have tentacles 27 feet long, which would make it a pretty formidable monster. "Do people fish for them nowadays?" asked the Canadian. "No, but sailors see them all the same. One of my friends, Captain Paul Boss from Le Havre, has often told me about how he met one of these enormous monsters in the Indian Ocean. But the most astonishing event, the one which dispels all doubts concerning the existence of such gigantic animals, took place several years ago in 1861. "What happened?" asked Ned Land. "Well, in that year, to the northwest of Tenerife, at very nearly the same latitude we're in now, the crew of the dispatch vessel Alecton noticed a huge squid swimming near the ship. The commander, Bouger, brought the ship alongside the creature and harpooned and shot. And okay, let's try this again. Commander Boucher brought the ship alongside, had the creature harpooned and shot, but without much success, for the bullets and harpoons went through its soft flesh as if it were loose jelly. After several unsuccessful attempts, the crew managed to pass a slipknot around the creature's body. The loop slid back to the caudal fins, and there it stopped. They then tried hauling the monster on board, but it weighed so much that its tail merely broke off, and the squid itself, separated from this part of its body, disappeared beneath the surface." "Finally, we have some facts," said Ned Land. "Undisputable facts, my good Ned. As a result of what happened, people suggested naming the creature Bouger's squid." "How long was it?" asked the Canadian. Wasn't it about 20 feet long?" said Conseil, standing at the window and once more examining the rugged cliffs. "Precisely," I answered. "And wasn't its head," Conseil went on, "crowned with 8 tentacles which thrashed about on the water like a nest of snakes?" "Absolutely." "And didn't it have huge popping eyes?" "Yes, Conseil." "And wasn't its mouth like a parakeet's beak, but enormous?" "That's right." "Well, then, if monsieur doesn't mind my saying so," Conseil replied calmly, "this is either Bouger's squid or one of his first cousins." I looked at Conseil. Ned Land rushed to the window. "What a horrible creature!" he cried. I then looked around, and I could not repress a gesture of repulsion. Before my eyes wriggled a terrible monster, worthy of all the legends about such creatures. It was a giant squid, 25 feet long. It was heading toward the Nautilus, swimming backward very fast. Its huge, immobile eyes were of blue-green color. The 8 arms, or rather legs, coming out of its head, it is this which has earned it the name of cephalopod, were twice as long as its body and were twisting about like the hair of a Greek fury. We could clearly make out the 250 suckers lining the inside of its tentacles, some of which fastened onto the glass panel of the lounge. This monster's mouth, a horny beak like that of a parakeet, opened and closed vertically. Its tongue, also made of a horn-like substance and armed with several rows of sharp teeth, would come out and snake and shake what seemed like veritable cutlery. What a whim of nature! A bird's beak and a mollusk. Its elongated body was, with a slight swelling in the middle, formed a fleshy mass which must have weighed between 40 and 50,000 pounds. Its color, which could change very fast according to the animal's mood, would vary from a ghastly gray to reddish brown. What was irritating this creature? Undoubtedly it was the presence of the Nautilus, which was more formidable than it, and on which its arms and suckers could get no hold. Yet what monsters are such squid? What vitality the Creator has given them, and what vigor of movement, and to think they possess 3 hearts! We had encountered this mollusk quite by chance, and I did not want to lose the opportunity of studying it carefully. I overcame my horror at the sight of it, and, taking up a pencil, started to draw it. This was perhaps the same one that almost caught on to the Alecton, said Conseil. No, replied the Canadian, because this one's whole and the other one had lost its tail. That doesn't make any difference, I said. The arms and tails of these creatures can reform by a special process, and I'm sure that in 7 years, Bouguer's squid has had time to grow another tail. Besides, said Ned, if it isn't this one, it's maybe one of those. And in fact, other squid had appeared outside the starboard window. I counted 7. They were swimming in a procession around the Nautilus, and I could hear the noise of their beaks grinding on the steel hull. Our wishes were more than satisfied. I continued my work. These monsters kept up with us so easily that they seemed immobile, and I could easily have traced a reduced outline of one on the window. Besides, we were not traveling very fast. Suddenly, the Nautilus stopped. There was a blow which made it quiver throughout its length. Have we struck ground? If we did, we're already free, replied the Canadian, for we're floating. But even though the Nautilus was floating, it wasn't moving. The blades of its propeller were not revolving in the water. After a minute or so, Captain Nemo entered the lounge, followed by the first mate. I had not seen him for some time. He seemed gloomy. Without saying a word to us, perhaps without even seeing us, he went over to the glass panel, looked at the squid, and said several words to his first mate, who then left the room. Soon the panels closed and the ceiling lights came on. I went over to the captain. A curious collection of squid, I said, in the offhand tone of someone standing before the window of an aquarium. Indeed it is, monsieur, he replied, and we're going to fight them hand to hand. I looked at the captain. I thought I had not heard him right. Hand to hand, I repeated. Yes, monsieur, the propeller has been stopped. I think one of these squid got his horned beak caught up in the propeller, and now we can't move. What do you intend to do? Surface the ship and wipe out all this vermin. That will be difficult. Yes, it will. Our electric bullets have no effect against these animals, for their soft flesh doesn't offer enough resistance to make them explode. But we'll attack them with axes. And with a harpoon, monsieur, said the Canadian, if you'll permit me to help you. I accept, Master Land. We'll go with you, I said, and we followed Captain Nemo to the central companionway. There, 10 or 12 men, armed with boarding axes, were ready for the attack. Conseil and I each took an axe, and Ned Land a harpoon. By then the Nautilus had surfaced. One of the sailors at the top of the companionway unscrewed the bolts holding down the latch, but hardly had they been unscrewed when the hatch flew up with great violence, obviously pulled up by the suckers on a squid's arm. One of these long arms immediately slid like a snake into the opening, and 20 others were waving about above. With one blow of his axe, Captain Nemo cut this formidable tentacle, and it slid writhing down the companionway. Just as we were pressing one another to get out onto the platform, 2 other arms came slashing down through the air, grabbed the sailor in front of Captain Nemo, and pulled him out with an irresistible force. Captain Nemo let out a cry and rushed up to the platform. We clambered out after him. What a scene! The poor man was being clutched by the tentacles with their suckers and waved about in the air. He was half dead and choking, but he managed to shout, "Help! Help!" I was astonished to hear these words uttered in French. So I had a compatriot on board, perhaps several. All my life I shall hear this heart-rending cry. The poor man was done for. Who could save him from such a powerful grip? Nevertheless, Captain Nemo hurled himself at the squid, and with one blow of his axe cut off yet another arm. The first mate struggled furiously with other monsters which were climbing up the sides of the Nautilus. The crew were flailing away with their axes. Ned, Conseil, and I also dug our weapons into the soft bodies. A violent odor of musk filled the air. It was horrible. For a moment I thought the poor man entangled in the squid would be saved from its powerful suckers. Several of its 8 arms had been cut. Only one, brandishing the victim like a feather, still writhed about in the air. But just as Captain Nemo and the first mate rushed at it, the animal let out a jet of black ink. We were blinded by it. When the cloud of spray had cleared away, the squid had disappeared, and with it my unfortunate compatriot. With what a fury we then attacked these monsters. We were beyond ourselves. 10 or 12 squid had invaded the platform and sides of the Nautilus. We were struggling pell-mell in the midst of snake-like pieces of tentacles, jumping about on the platform among torrents of blood and black ink. It seemed as if these slimy arms grew back instantly like Hydra's heads. Each time Ned Land wielded his harpoon, it would plunge into a squid's sea-green eyes. But suddenly my brave companion was knocked over by the tentacles of a monster he could not avoid. Oh, how close my heart came to breaking from emotion and horror. The squid's huge mouth had opened over Ned Land. The poor man was about to be cut in 2. I rushed over to help him, but Captain Nemo had gotten there first. He buried his axe between the 2 enormous jaws, and Ned Land, miraculously saved, got up and plunged his harpoon deep into the creature's triple heart. "I owed you this," said Captain Nemo. Ned bowed his head without answering. The struggle lasted 15 minutes. The monsters, defeated, mutilated, or killed, finally left us and disappeared beneath the surface. Captain Nemo, covered with blood and standing immobile next to the searchlight, looked at the sea which had swallowed up one of his companions, and tears ran down his cheeks. And that is the end of chapter 42. So, again, just to give you kind of a brief plan for the future here, as I read 2 chapters at a time, we will read 2 more on Monday, and then we will actually read 2 on Wednesday, and then the conclusion, which is very short, so 2.5 really. And that will be the end of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. We are almost there. And as I said before, go to the Adventure and Mystery Book Club Facebook page, if you would please, and go vote or nominate a public domain title that you think would be good to read as part of our next series. Hopefully, something with fewer Latin words, and then we look. I really look forward to kind of seeing what people are interested in. We've only had one response so far, but this is up to you. This is your group, and I really want whatever titles we read to represent the folks in this group. So go to the Facebook page, vote in the comments section for yesterday's post, and we will see you on Monday at 4 p.m. as we read the next 2 chapters of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And then a week from today, this is how soon it is, a week from today, we will start the first chapters of our brand new title, whatever title that happens to be. You tell me. I look forward to seeing it. Bye, everyone. Thank you.